Hey everyone, welcome to the Midweek Podcast. This is going to be the last installment for the series.
It is.
We rebooted the podcast as we started the Eat This Book series, and as of Sunday, that series is over.
That's right. So, and it's been a great series. I've really enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed the podcast, being able to unpack more of what really was left out of the sermons, and maybe even go a little bit further than what was included.
Right.
So
if you're ever interested, you can always go back to YouTube, or I think there may be some on Facebook, but YouTube's going to be the primary source where you can go back and watch these podcasts. And really, I think where we've landed, at least for now, is that these podcasts are going to be a way to help resource some of the big sermon series that we do. We did the podcast for a sermon series back in, I think it was October, November-ish, on disciple making. And this one has been on Bible. And so, we'll just kind of see. We'll be kind of pretty open-ended. But as for now, this is going to be the last midweek podcast for the series of Eat This Book.
Yeah.
So sad. I'm very sad.
So sad.
But again, we hope that it's been helpful and beneficial for you. My name is Adam Smith. I'm the pastor of Student Community.
that's right. Just got ordained.
Just
Congratulations.
fresh off ordination. It's awesome.
That's right.
So that happened on Sunday.
Yep. And I'm Luke Erb, the associate pastor here
And
at
the
CCC.
preacher.
And the preacher. I got to preach on Revelation this past Sunday.
Which was
So-
a daunting task.
It was. I'd be lying if I said if I wasn't nervous. So, it was.
Yeah. But I enjoyed the sermon. I think for me, again, something that you touched on was that it can sometimes be a taboo book.
Yeah.
The way that I view it is oftentimes the book of Revelation can be viewed, or the letter of the Revelation could be viewed as one of two extremes. On one hand, it's the scary house, the haunted house at the end of the street that you never go down. It's the one that you've heard about, but you're not going into it. You just
hilarious.
Yeah. So that's one extreme, but then the other one is that Revelation can be like this cryptic code where we use to, crack the code of when Jesus is coming back, what's the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, and all these things. And I think both are very unhealthy extremes when taken to that extreme.
Yeah.
But in the middle is that sweet balance that you were able to talk about of it's not the scary house on the end of the street. It's not this cryptic code.
Right.
It is a letter that is written to Christians at a specific time to give them comfort and hope.
Right. And I guess my goal was really just to make it accessible to everybody to read it. And, and it's kind of like reading through the book of Numbers, where, there's a few chapters of just names and numbers. But if you get past that, man, there's so much to see, so much to read in that book. And just like Revelation, for all of the crazy imagery, even if you read through that, you still get the meat of this encouraging letter that Jesus is sending to his church. And a letter of love, a letter of encouragement that I know times are hard right now, but it's all worth it. Be my faithful witness, and that everything will be made right in the end.
Yeah, and that was one of the helpful hints that you gave of remembering that it's a letter, that this is written to Christians undergoing extreme persecution. And this letter is going to be bringing about hope, encouragement, but then also rebuke, right?
Yeah.
Because when we get into chapters 2 and 3, we see that this is a circulating letter to about 7 or so different churches.
Yep.
And there's a special little note for each of them.
That's right.
But I know for me, again, because growing up, I didn't read Revelation a lot. I thought Revelation was just calling out lukewarm Christians.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
Right.
But when you go through and read some of this, that's not all that it is. So.
Oh, not at all. Actually, from church to church, it's actually very different as far as the words that Jesus has for those churches. Some of them are doing well.
Very well.
Others not so much at all. And so, like I had mentioned, a threat of even removing their status as a church, their lampstand or menorah. Yeah. And and it's really fascinating to read through it, because then I think even a question for an individual or even for a church is, wow, if Jesus were writing this letter to our church, which one would that really fit?
Yeah.
Right?
Honestly.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Honestly. And so where are those, where's my shortcomings in this? And where are the places that I need to, have I gotten away from my first love?
Yeah.
With the Church of Ephesus. Pergamum, is there a period of intense persecution? Am I being distracted?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a sense is there immorality that I'm putting up with within the body? Hey, wait a second. We need to really do a gut check here. And what does my faithfulness to Yahweh look like? Mm-hmm. And so, it's just, it's just one of those that'll just hit you right between the eyes.
It really will. It really will.
And even for all of this, what we've not even really addressed is all of that imagery of the judgment and everything else. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the big questions is, how does that even fit in to all of this, right?
Yeah.
Because I didn't get to talk about the structure of the book of Revelation yesterday, because really you have the first 3 chapters covering the letters to the churches. Mm-hmm. So very personal introduction, but then the rest of the message, the rest of the book of Revelation would have been an addendum to those initial introductions, and they would have made it around to all of those churches.
Right.
So they would have had the entire book. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just the first chapters, that was it. No, it was everything. And but with a personal introduction. How would you like to have a personal introduction to a book of the Bible?
You think it would be really nice until you hear the contents of it. But
That's right.
But I think, again, just the overarching theme that we're seeing, not just in Revelation, but throughout the book, and again, you touched on it in your sermon, is the idea of covenant faithfulness.
Yeah.
That is really the driving point. It's something that we see in the prophets.
Yep.
It's something that we see all throughout, the Torah and, the historical books. And even in the book of Acts, are we going to be faithful to the covenant, the promise that we've made with our God?
Yeah.
Because there is that level of accountability. And so in the first couple chapters, I really see that, right?
Yeah.
But then that bleeds into, okay, well, let's get an idea of some of the prophecy and the visions of what is happening or what is to come. So
yeah, and you absolutely nailed it. If there's one theme from cover to cover, it's covenant faithfulness, mm-hmm. right? Because that really does include themes of redemption.
Right.
God has made covenant with his people, mm-hmm. those who choose to be his people.
Right.
And then it's this responsibility that we have to live within that faithfulness.
Yeah.
Faithfully.
And so before we, get past chapters 1 through 3 and we start talking about 4 and beyond, it's just that beautiful reminder of, John, the revelator John is writing on the island of Patmos.
Yeah.
And he is getting a vision from Jesus himself.
Right.
And so I love what you said in your sermon. Again, if you haven't, go back and watch it. It's great. But you talk about how John is, in a sense, kind of taken out of his current perspective into a heavenly perspective, but with the intent that heavenly perspective or that godly perspective is going to now inform his current situation.
That's right.
And I think that is so key, because oftentimes we get, lofted into, he is having this vision from the Lord, but it's he's drawing him out to give him a perspective, so that he can live out in his current situation from that perspective, which is so important.
It really is.
And so, from chapters 4 on, this heavenly perspective, this, vision and vision is going to be so important, because I even remember, I think it's in chapter 1, mm-hmm. where he says, blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy or this vision, and blessed are those who hear it and take to heart what is written in it. And what is written in it? It's that perspective, so that it can inform them to live out their covenant faithfulness, and to just be reminded that what we see now is not all that there is.
That's right.
Right? That's almost the words of Paul in 2 Corinthians.
Oh yeah.
Where he's like, hey, we don't fix our eyes on what is seen, we fix our eyes on what is unseen.
Yes.
And that is what we live by. And when you think about the book of Revelation and that source of encouragement,
mm-hmm.
man, it has a completely different ring to it than, this is just a bunch of random, cryptic codes to try to unpack.
Right. No, it's the revelation. It's being revealed. Mm-hmm. Not, hey, here's a mystery, good luck.
Right.
That's not it at all.
Right.
Like, this was given for us to understand.
Yeah. And we understand it best in its context.
That's right.
With the Old Testament references.
Yep.
With reading it, understanding the first century historical, political, context that's going on there.
Yep.
And then honestly, just reading the message.
Yeah.
Going back to what you're talking about, we have to see what the message is trying to be communicated to these churches. So.
That's right.
So anyway, that was kind of a long, but again, our hope is that from some of these messages, you can have these sorts of conversations with your family, with your small group, with your friends, because this really is this podcast is really just us dissecting the sermon and talking more about it. And we hope that you're able to do that as well. So
yeah,
I don't know. It's just always encouraging.
Oh, for sure. And for our role at the church, if there are questions, if there is, questions about, hey, what kind of resources, use. I tried to mention a couple, on Sunday in the sermon. And, one of my favorites is, New Testament theology, the theology of the book of Revelation by Richard Bauckham. So fantastic. If you could actually see, it's all highlighted. And I don't do that to books. And, but there's resources out there that really do help make this clear, because, people have devoted their lives to understanding that first century context to a lot of what's being written here. And it's not as mysterious as what we might think.
Right.
And so, but, and that doesn't neutralize this. It doesn't neuter it in any way. It's still powerful. And when we understand it in its original context, actually, it becomes even more powerful and loud in our understanding, because then it translates directly into our current context. When we understand what these words meant then, and the systems of the earth, whether it be political or religious or whatever, really what a lot of that imagery is dealing with, we begin to look around and kind of from that divine perspective, oh, wow, this is the stuff that Jesus was warning his people about then. And maybe I should take that same warning today.
Yeah, it's so amazing. And this, again, when we're able to do this study, it's not that we're being critical of the text and, we're coming to it trying to find its flaws and everything. It's just asking those honest questions about, what is this? What does this mean? All that stuff. And by asking those questions, that revelation of what it's communicating to us does in fact help us grow in our love and understanding of God's word, which again is the whole point of this series.
That's exactly
this podcast.
Right.
So as we kind of continue on with the remaining time that we have left in our podcast, we're going to be starting a new series next week, actually, talking about worship a little bit. And so it's actually ironic because you gave that introduction into Revelation to end this series. And we're actually going to be talking about Revelation 4 and Revelation 5 to kick off our worship series.
Super excited about that.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. So, we'll talk a little bit more about Revelation 4 and 5 next week in our sermons, because we won't have a podcast.
That's right.
So feel free to read that and study that. But I would just love to maybe give a quick overview. And if there's any questions maybe that immediately pop up from these coming chapters, or even just any summaries that we want to give or anything that's worth noting, we can do that with the remaining time, and then we'll wrap up.
Yep.
So
sounds good. Really. So following the letters, we are introduced basically to a scene in heaven, and it's worship time. Kind of and that, what a better way to kick off a worship series, right? And especially in this time of year with Resurrection Day, we are going to be focusing on the Lamb, chapter 5, and the worship, the exaltation of the Lamb. And so that's 4 and 5, and that really does set the scene for really everything that follows, because really what you're looking at is the Yahweh being worshipped as the creator of all things, the author of all things. And so his supremacy is established. It's been established from eternity past, and it is established for eternity future. And that's important, because as things get really ugly, it's all going to go back to who's in charge. And it's God. It's God. And so really, that's 4 and 5. And then with 6, it's the Lamb opening up the seals. And so because really, he has been given authority over the earth. And so we kind of talked about this Sunday that it's Jesus who is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and it is his authority over the earth that has been granted to him by God to really exact judgment on it. And so that introduces the seal judgment, and but then even in the midst of this, there's a remnant, a faithful remnant that is left to minister on the earth. And really, as an overall structure, we're looking at chapter 4 through 9, possibly 11, as being like the whole story, and then from 11 to 19 as kind of going back and filling in more of the details within chapters 9 through 11. And so that's why a lot of this could be super confusing, like chronologically, if you read it that way. But a lot of this is going to be a subset within this core group of chapters.
And even going back to what you were first saying of just some of the main ideas that get established, right? So John is, taken up pretty much like in the spirit to like this heavenly scene, and that's when he sees God, Yahweh, seated on his throne, in control and supremacy. You see the angels bowing down to him, worshiping him for everything. That's also where we're introduced to like this idea of the lion and the lamb. Again, for a while I was confused when like I first started singing that song a couple years ago, like what does that mean? And maybe you even have that question, like where do we get this from? It's from the book of Revelation. The lion of the tribe of Judah, talked about in the Old Testament, this like roaring king who is going to be powerful. And then once they say in this heavenly scene, here comes the lion, they see a sacrificial lamb. And it's showing you who like Christ is, Jesus is. He's the lion of the tribe of Judah, a powerful king, but he came as a suffering servant. So again, all that Old Testament imagery coming to light here. And so you're going through and you read these different outlines and sections all throughout, but those main ideas get established here.
And so, the seal judgments, the trumpet judgments, a lot of these mimic the plagues of the Exodus, the plagues that God exacted on Egypt, on the gods of Egypt. And so we have a kind of a replay of that. And really, one could even see this as just exacting that judgment on the just idols of the earth. And so really just bringing about that cleansing. Just like I know a lot of times forest fires can be so destructive because, there's so much litter that has been built up over the years because we prevent fires. Actually, forest fires are very healthy for forests. It destroys all the disease and the dead and a lot of the pests and everything else. And for the stronger trees, they're fine. They weather it just fine. But when we prevent fires year after year after year, the forest floor becomes full of litter, and then it's just like kindling. And so the fires are that much stronger, and then that's when it just burns everything. But at its very core, in its natural cycle, as God has kind of authored that, like that level of destruction, that fire, is cleansing and healthy for the environment. And really that's kind of a way that we can see these judgments. It's a way of cleansing the earth in a very healthy way and kind of getting it back to that garden status. Right? So
totally. Because when you're reading through the book of Revelation, one of the main things that come up is this imagery of Babylon, right? And so Babylon, again, in its context, was its own empire that is since not in power or really much of existence anymore, but it becomes this motif or this theme of like this kingdom that is opposed to God, right? And so like this is God demonstrating his justice on like the Babylon, right? The people that are opposed to him. So and it's that way of kind of purifying, cleansing, and bringing about justice on the earth.
That's exactly right. So by the time we get to chapter 12, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, and she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. And a lot of this imagery is actually within astronomy, dealing with constellations and things like that. A lot of this does actually go back to the time that Jesus was born.
Yep.
And read an article here recently that actually, like, by the description of the dragon, of the male child, the woman who's in labor, a lot of those are astrological signs, constellations, if you will. And so they've actually taken that to, at that exact time, would have been the Feast of Trumpets in the year that Jesus was born. And so just a theory that he was actually born on that feast day.
Wow. But I mean, you can see just even in the book of Revelation, like, this is just one chapter, but you can get so deep in conversation and trying to figure out what all does this mean, right? But again, it's easy to get lost in that, right? Where it's just like, oh man, what does this mean? This vision, this thing. But like, I skip all the way to like the end of Revelation. And like, if we didn't have the book of Revelation, just, I don't know how incomplete our theology and our Bible would feel without the restoration of all things, because you get to chapters 21 or 20, 21, and 22, and then this is kind of like that reversing of the curse that you talked about in your sermon, where God is restoring all things. He is, putting Satan up, he's locking him up, right? He's defeating, death and sin and all this stuff, and he's bringing about restoration. He's bringing about his divine presence to dwell among his people and creating this new Jerusalem.
That's right. Yeah. So chapter 20, you have judgment. 21, a new heaven and new earth, and then even the new Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so God has wrapped everything up, has brought everything about as new, and in the new Jerusalem, he gets to dwell like in the presence of his people.
Yeah.
Man. Wow.
And like, that's what we get to look forward to. And, talks about like the tree of life, which again is tying back to Genesis. So like, you're seeing all these Old Testament references, but what a blessing like Revelation is for us today, because it gives us this complete picture and gives us that living hope of, okay, like, cool, Jesus, lived for me, he died for me, what now? And Revelation shows us what is to come, and that's just so encouraging.
That's right.
And I'm sure it would have encouraged the people back then too.
Absolutely. I mean, so just like what you were saying at the beginning about that divine perspective, as they were enduring such persecution, they needed that divine perspective, that bigger picture of how everything will fit together and really just be made new.
Yeah, and for us today, I think we may experience that same thing. Whether we're going through personal trials, national trials, or even worldly trials, like all the stuff that's going on, we long for and yearn for like what is talked about here.
That's right.
And like we want heaven to come quickly for sure, but we can be the means in which heaven comes to earth. We bring the kingdom of God with us. So while we wait for our King to return, we ask, Lord, equip us and strengthen us to be your faithful witnesses, and your priests who are bringing about your kingdom and your reign here on earth as we wait for you to return.
Every day that he, doesn't come is an opportunity for us to minister and to further his kingdom. And that is honestly a point of grace.
It really is. And that's the book of Revelation.
That's the book of Revelation.
In a nutshell.
That's right.
So again, as I am closing, this is crazy, but I'm really thankful for just our church. Again, we hope that this has been a huge blessing for you, not just the sermon series, but all the things that we here at CCC provide, just with the hopes that, you can grow in your relationship with God, that you feel equipped to be his disciples and to be his witnesses in Columbus and Indiana, all throughout the world. That like you love the church, not just CCC, but the body of believers. That is our hope. So, I don't know. I don't really have much to say. I wish I was more articulate, but just thankful for CCC and thankful for you for tuning in and being a part of this journey with us. So,
thank you.
You have any thoughts?
Read your Bibles.
That's right. Oh man, you can always count on Luke reminding us to read our Bibles. Read God's word. It's good.